Welcome to Stories of the Damned. Step into the shadows of history. Let us know in the comments below which city you are watching from and what time it is right now, where you are. We want to see where our viewers around the world are tuning in from as we uncover the darkest corners of the past. The first sound was not the dogs. It was the chain. With a slow, deliberate scrape, it dragged across packed dirt, metal against stone. A sound meant to be heard. He wanted the forest to know he had come, the plantation master. He wanted the man who ran to know it too. The chain belonged to no prisoner now. Looped over the saddle horn like a trophy, it was a relic of warning. Every few steps he let it fall and pull again, leaving a crooked line in the soil, as if to say there was no hiding from what followed. Pale and cold, morning fog clung low to the ground, curling around tree trunks and roots like breath that refused to leave. Dense and old stood the forest, its canopy stitched together by moss and hanging vines, its floor soft with rot and fallen leaves. The master had hunted in worse places. He told himself that as he dismounted and tied his horse to a cypress, patting the animal's neck with a confidence he had practiced for years. The horse snorted, uneasy, ears flicking toward the trees. Animals felt things before men did. He ignored it. At their leashes, the dogs strained, muscles tight beneath coarse fur. 6 of them this time. Big scarred hounds with white teeth and dark eyes bred for one purpose only. They did not bark yet. They didn't need to. They already had the scent. It had been hours since the slave ran, but fear left a trail stronger than blood. Fear sweated out of skin, soaked into cloth, pressed itself into the earth with every panicked step. Thinly, the master smiled as he knelt and unhooked the leads one by one. "Go on," he said softly, not shouting. He never shouted at the start. "Do what you were born to do." Forward surged the dogs, noses low, bodies flowing between trees as if pulled by invisible strings. Leaves rustled, branches snapped, the forest swallowed them quickly, and the master followed, rifle cradled in his arms, boots steady, breathing slow. This was not his first hunt. It was not even his 10th. He knew how these things ended. They always did. The runaway's name did not matter to him anymore. Once a man ran, he became something else, a thing to be retrieved, a lesson to be taught. The master had already imagined the end. Imagined it the night before, sitting on his porch with a glass of whiskey, while the plantation slept. He would bring the man back alive if possible. Broken was acceptable. Dead was inconvenient, but forgivable. Fear, though, fear was required. Fear was the point. Ahead, one of the dogs let out a low bay, testing the air. Another answered. The sound echoed oddly, stretched thin by distance and trees. Just slightly. The master frowned. Sound behaved strangely in thick forest. He kept moving. Downward sloped the ground, leading toward a creek swollen from recent rain. Mud sucked at his boots, slowing him, but the dogs did not hesitate. They crossed water without breaking stride, splashing through shallows and leaping fallen logs slick with moss. On the far bank, the master paused, scanning the ground. There, broken reeds, a scuffed stone, a footprint half filled with water but unmistakable bare. The man had lost his shoes early. They always did. A familiar satisfaction settled into the master's chest. This would not take long. What he did not see was how the forest had changed since the runaway entered it. The man had not fled blindly, not at first. He had run because pain demanded motion, because the crack of a whip still rang in his ears. Even after the sound was gone, he ran because stopping felt like dying. But after hours of tearing through underbrush, lungs burning, feet raw and bleeding, something in him had shifted. The panic thinned. The fear cooled into something harder, heavier. He knew this forest, not like the master thought he knew it, but truly knew it. He had hauled timber from its edges, trapped small game along its streams, slept beneath its branches on nights when the quarters were too loud with grief to rest. The forest had always watched him. Quietly now it opened itself in pieces. He recognized paths hidden beneath leaves, ground that dipped just enough to hold water, trees whose bark peeled in long strips perfect for binding wounds. When he heard the dogs for the first time, distant but unmistakable, he did not scream. He did not pray. He slowed. The man pressed his palm against the trunk of an oak and breathed until his heart obeyed him. Clearer grew the sound of the dogs, their baying sharper. He could tell how many there were by the rhythm of their voices. He could tell their size by the depth. He could tell how far they were by how the sound bent around the trees. He closed his eyes and listened, not like prey, but like a man counting steps. He moved again, but differently now. He stepped in water where he could, then doubled back over stones. He climbed a low ridge and crossed it sideways to break his trail. He tore a strip from his shirt and tied it around a sapling at head height, then veered sharply away, knowing the dogs would rush toward it, noses lifted, momentarily confused by scent where no body stood. It bought him minutes. Minutes were everything. The first delay was felt by the master without understanding it. The dogs slowed near the creek bank, circling, baying uncertainly. One dog barked sharply, frustrated. The master clicked his tongue and moved closer, peering down at the ground. The trail was still there, fainter, but present. He reassured himself. Fear made men clumsy. Fear made them think they were clever when they were not. Still, he noticed how the forest seemed quieter than it should be. Birds were scarce. Insects hummed but irregularly, as if sound itself hesitated. The dogs picked up speed again, and the master followed, pushing deeper into the trees. Light thinned as the canopy closed overhead, turning morning into something like late evening. The air grew damp, heavy with the smell of wet earth and decay. Sweat slicked the master's back beneath his coat. He wiped his brow with the back of his hand and kept walking. Then one of the dogs yelped. It was short, sharp, not the sound of a fight, but of surprise. The master froze, heart jumping despite himself. He listened. The other dogs barked, excited now, clustered around something unseen ahead. The master hurried forward, rifle ready, eyes scanning for movement. He found the dog tangled in a mess of roots near a fallen tree, leg caught awkwardly, skin torn where it had twisted. Not a trap exactly, just bad ground. The dog whined, struggling. The master swore under his breath and knelt, working the leg free. The injury was not fatal, but it would slow the animal. Damn it, he muttered, glancing around as he secured the dog to a tree with a length of rope. He did not like stopping. He did not like kneeling in the forest with his back exposed. The feeling passed when he stood again. He told himself it meant nothing, but when he looked up, the forest seemed closer somehow. Trees pressed in, their trunks dark and straight, their branches interlacing overhead like fingers. For a fleeting moment he had the irrational sense of being observed, not by the runaway, but by the place itself. He shook it off and whistled sharply. The remaining dogs surged ahead once more. Farther on, the man crouched behind a thick tangle of brush, breathing through his nose, sweat cooling on his skin. He had heard the yelp. He allowed himself one tight smile that never reached his eyes. Not victory, not yet, just confirmation. He picked up a stone and tossed it gently into the brush to his left. It landed with a soft thud. He waited, counting heartbeats. Moments later, distant barking shifted direction, pulled by instinct toward the new sound. The man rose silently and slipped away in the opposite direction, moving low, careful not to snap branches or disturb leaves. He was not running now. He was leading. The master followed the dogs as they veered, irritation gnawing at him. The trail twisted more than it should have. He began to feel it in his legs, the long miles, the uneven ground. His breathing grew louder in his ears. He did not like that either. Still he pressed on, driven by habit and pride. He had come too far to turn back. The forest did not frighten him. Men frightened him. And this man, this runaway, was still in his mind less than a man. The dogs burst into a small clearing and skidded to a halt, circling wildly. The master arrived seconds later and stared in confusion. The ground was torn with tracks, but they went nowhere, overlapping and broken, ending abruptly near a cluster of stones. The scent was strong here, overwhelming, but directionless. The master's jaw tightened. He scanned the trees, lifting his rifle. "Show yourself," he called, voice sharp, cutting through the clearing. Only the dogs answered, whining and pacing, uncertain. Somewhere in the trees, just beyond sight, the man watched, silent as bark, hands steady, eyes clear. The hunt had begun, yes, but not the way the master believed. Not anymore. By the time the sun lifted itself above the treetops, the man, who had once been called a slave, had stopped running. That decision did not come from courage, in the way men like to imagine courage. It came from exhaustion so complete that fear lost its edge. His lungs burned like scraped iron. His calves trembled with each step, and the night's damp still clung to his skin, soaking into scars old and new. He had run for 2 days without rest, driven by the sound that haunted every enslaved soul who ever fled. Dogs. Now in the grey hush of early morning, that sound faded into something less certain. Not gone, never gone, but different. Interrupted. He slowed to a walk, then to a halt. Deep within a stand of towering pines, with a forest floor dipped into a shallow bowl, choked with ferns and fallen needles. The air here smelled of resin and rot, of life breaking down to feed more life. It was a place animals passed through, but did not linger. He knew that because he had once been made to hunt here, long before he ever dreamed of freedom. His name was Eli, though no white man had spoken it with care. To them he had been boy or that one or nothing at all. But the forest remembered names differently. It did not need them spoken aloud. Eli leaned against a tree and closed his eyes. He listened. The forest had its own breath. Wind slid through branches in long whispering exhales. Insects ticked and clicked, testing the warming air. Somewhere far off, a bird cried and was answered. Beneath it all was the sound he waited for. The dogs, their panting, their claws scraping bark and stone. The low urgency of their voices as they searched for his scent. They were there, but they were confused. He opened his eyes. That confusion was his doing. During the night, he had crossed the creek 3 times, doubling back once, then wading upstream with his feet pressed against the current, so his scent drifted away from him. He had rubbed pine sap into his palms and smeared it along his arms and chest, masking the sharp salt of sweat and fear. He had rolled in damp leaves, then climbed a low ridge barefoot, letting his shoes trail behind him like bait. These were not tricks he had learned from books or whispered legends. They were lessons carved into him by pain. The master, who now hunted him, had once forced him to track other runaways. Eli had watched dogs work. He had seen how they hesitated when a trail broke, how their noses lifted and circled when certainty vanished. He had memorized their mistakes. Now, for the first time, he was not reacting, he was choosing. Eli slid down into the shallow bowl and crouched. He took off his shirt, already torn, already stiff with dried blood, and wrapped it around a sapling, knotting it tight. Then he tore a strip from the hem and tied it to another branch farther on. False signs, lures, invitations. He pressed his ear to the ground. Footsteps, human, confident. The master was close enough now that Eli could almost picture him tall in the saddle of his authority, rifle slung easy. Boots made for crushing rather than feeling the earth. A man who believed the forest was something to be pushed through, not listened to. A man who had never needed to notice the way the ground shifted beneath his weight. Eli's mouth tightened. He had spent years noticing. Slowly, carefully, he moved deeper into the bowl, stepping only where pine needles lay thick, muffling sound. He snapped no branches. He disturbed no stones. He climbed onto a fallen log slick with moss and balanced there, letting his weight spread evenly, then dropped down on the other side and did not look back. The dogs entered the bowl minutes later. Eli heard them before he saw them. One whined uncertainly. Another growled softly, frustrated by the broken trail. Their paws scuffed the ground where his scent should have been strong, but wasn't. They circled the sapling with the shirt, barking in confusion, tails stiff. Eli's heart hammered, but his hands were steady. He moved around them, not away. That was the difference. Running widened the distance. Hunting narrowed it. He crept uphill, using the slope to stay above them, where his scent rose and thinned. From there he watched. The dogs were powerful animals, lean, scarred, bred for one purpose. He had seen them tear men down. He respected them even now. They were not evil. They were trained. That was why he did not rush. The master appeared soon after, pushing through brush with impatience etched into every movement. He cursed when a branch snapped back and struck his coat. He yanked one dog by the collar, forcing its head down to the ground, demanding certainty where none existed. Eli felt something hard settle in his chest. He could leave even now. He could slip away while confusion reigned, disappear deeper into the woods, trust distance and time to do the rest. But he thought of the men he had tracked, the way their eyes had looked when the dogs found them, the way the master had laughed, pleased by the efficiency of it all. Eli stayed. The dogs began to spread out, fanning into the trees. One veered too far uphill. That was the one Eli chose. He waited until it paused, head cocked uncertainly. Then he moved. He did not run. He flowed downhill, then sideways, keeping trees between himself and the master's line of sight. When the dog caught sight of him, it barked once, sharp, surprised, and lunged. Eli turned at the last second and led it into a narrow gap between two boulders. The dog forced itself through, shoulders scraping stone, momentum broken. Eli spun, wrapped one arm around its neck, and twisted, using the animal's own weight against it. It was over quickly. Eli lowered the dog gently to the ground. He closed its eyes, though they did not need closing. He pressed his forehead to the animal's fur and breathed once, steadying himself. Then he vanished again. The forest held its breath. When the master heard the abrupt silence of one dog, his confidence cracked. He called out, sharp and commanding, but the remaining dogs did not answer as they should have. They hesitated. They sniffed the air instead of charging ahead. Fear crept in, not the wild panic of prey, but the colder fear of a man realizing his rules no longer applied. Eli moved through the trees like a thought half-formed. He dragged branches behind him to erase traces, stepped in old prints to confuse numbers, crossed paths with himself, until even he could barely tell which way he had gone. He let the dogs catch glimpses of him, flashes of movement designed not to lure, but to unsettle. By midday, the forest was alive with tension. The dogs no longer pulled at their leashes. One refused to move forward at all. Another growled at shadows. The master's voice rose, then fell, then rose again as frustration fought control. Eli watched from above as the man struck one dog for disobedience. That was the moment something inside Eli hardened beyond bending. He did not feel triumph. He felt clarity. This was no longer about escape alone. It was about ending a pattern. Eli set the next stage carefully. He led the master toward a stretch of forest where the ground dropped away sharply into a ravine, hidden by undergrowth. He left signs just obvious enough to be followed. Broken twigs, scuffed dirt. A footprint pressed deep as if made by a tired man. The master followed without question. When the dogs reached the edge, they stopped. They whined. They circled. They refused to go down. The master cursed and pulled, yanking them forward, not seeing the drop until his boots slid on loose soil and sent stones clattering into empty space. He staggered back, heart racing. Eli watched from the opposite side, unseen, patient. The forest had learned his rhythm now. Birds did not cry when he moved. Leaves did not betray him. He felt less like a man hiding and more like something the woods had decided to keep. As the sun began its slow descent, the master stood alone at the ravine's edge, dogs restless at his side, confidence gone. Eli did not strike. Not yet. This was only the second day, and the hunt had finally turned. The first thing that went wrong was not the scream. It was the silence that came before it. The forest had a way of warning those who knew how to listen. Birds stilled mid-call. Insects paused their constant ticking chorus. Even the wind seemed to hesitate, as if unsure whether it was welcome to continue breathing. To men who lived their lives believing the world bent to them, these signs meant nothing. To Eli they meant everything. He crouched behind a fallen cedar, its trunk split long ago by lightning and softened by years of moss and rot. From here he could see the slope below him, a narrow stretch of ground funneling into thicker undergrowth, where visibility collapsed into green shadow. It was a place he had chosen carefully, not because it was dangerous, but because it could be made so by the right pair of hands. Below him, the dogs moved through the brush slower now. Their bodies were tense, ears swiveling constantly, nostrils flaring as they searched for a certainty that no longer existed. The absence of their companion had changed them. They did not understand death in the way humans did, but they understood absence. They understood when something that should answer did not. Eli felt it too. The weight of what he had done pressed against his chest, heavy, but not crushing. He had not taken life lightly. He never had, but he had learned long ago that mercy did not mean weakness, and survival did not always wear a gentle face. The master followed behind them, rifle resting across his shoulder, boots grinding leaf litter into the soil. His movements were less fluid now, his confidence worn thin by hours of uncertainty. He stopped often, scanning the trees, his eyes lingering longer on shadows than on open ground. His hand drifted to the grip of his weapon more frequently than before. Eli watched him and felt no pity. He remembered the sound of chains dragged across wooden floors, the smell of iron and sweat in cramped quarters. The way the master's voice carried easily across the fields, sharp and final, deciding the shape of other men's days without ever needing to raise itself in anger. Authority had always come naturally to him, like breathing, but breathing became harder in places like this. The dogs reached the funnel first. One of them, larger than the rest, its coat mottled with scars, paused and lowered its head, sniffing carefully. Its tail flicked uncertainly. The others fanned out, testing the air, their formation loose, where it had once been tight and purposeful. Eli shifted his weight slow and deliberate. He reached down and brushed his fingers against the earth. Feeling its cool dampness seep into his skin, he pressed his palm into the soil, leaving a clear print, then stepped away, circling wide. The master noticed the change in the dog's behavior. He barked a command, short and sharp, meant to restore order. The dogs obeyed, but without enthusiasm. Their barks echoed strangely here, swallowed too quickly by the trees. Then it happened. One of the dogs lunged forward suddenly, drawn by something only it could sense. It plunged into the undergrowth, branches snapping as it forced its way through. Its bark rose once, excited, triumphant, and then cut off. The sound did not fade. It stopped. The forest exhaled. The remaining dogs froze. Their bodies went rigid, ears straining. They whined softly, a sound that spoke of confusion rather than fear. The master swore under his breath and pushed forward, dragging one dog with him as he fought through the brush. "Get on," he snapped, more to himself than to the animals. "Get on," Eli moved. He did not rush. He did not chase the moment. He let the master take 2 more steps, let his weight shift forward, let his attention narrow to the space ahead of him. Then Eli struck the ground with a stone. It was not loud. It did not need to be. The sharp crack echoed just enough to turn the master's head, just long enough to pull his focus away from the dogs. In that instant, Eli slid sideways through the brush low and fast, his body a shadow slipping between shadows. He did not go toward the sound of the fallen dog. He went away from it, drawing the master's instincts in the wrong direction. The master recovered quickly. He always had. Years of command had taught him how to reassert control when things wavered. He scanned the trees, rifle lifting, eyes sharp again. But the forest had already shifted. He called out for the missing dog. No answer came. He shouted again, his voice rising, irritation sharpening into something closer to unease. The dogs at his side pulled back slightly, resisting the tug of his hand. Eli reached the edge of the funnel and dropped to his knees. He pressed his forearms into the ground and crawled, careful to disturb as little as possible. Ahead of him lay a patch of loose soil where roots had twisted up from the earth, leaving gaps beneath them. He slid into one of these hollows and waited. From here he could hear everything. The master moved closer, his boots crunching, his breath audible now. The dog's collars jingled faintly. Eli closed his eyes and let the sounds paint a picture in his mind, the distance between them, the angle of approach, the way the master favored his right leg when stepping over uneven ground. When the master reached the spot where the first dog had vanished, he stopped. Eli felt the tension ripple through the forest like a held note. The master crouched and pushed aside branches, revealing disturbed earth, broken twigs, the absence of what should have been there. He straightened slowly, his posture stiff, his jaw tight. "This ain't right," he muttered, though no one was there to hear him. That admission was more dangerous than any weapon. Eli slipped out of the hollow and circled again, staying downwind. He brushed past saplings, letting their leaves scrape his skin lightly, carrying his scent in thin, scattered traces rather than a single trail. He wanted the dogs to smell him, just enough to know he was there, not enough to know where. The effect was immediate. One dog barked sharp and high. Another growled, hackles rising. They strained at their leashes, pulling in opposite directions, their instincts colliding. The master shouted, anger flaring, but it rang hollow now. His authority no longer settled them. The dog's eyes flicked constantly, tracking movement that wasn't there. E moved again, faster this time. He snapped a branch deliberately and darted away, leading the dogs toward a stand of young trees where the ground dipped unevenly. The dogs surged forward, excitement breaking through fear. The master followed. That was his mistake. The ground gave way under one of the dogs, sending it tumbling into a shallow pit concealed by leaves and debris. It yelped, scrambling to get free. The master stumbled, catching himself just in time to avoid falling. Eli watched from above as frustration tipped into something darker. The master dragged the trapped dog free, his movements rough. He struck it once hard, as if punishment could restore order. The dog cowered, tail tucked, eyes wide. Eli felt his hands curl into fists. The forest seemed to lean closer. When the master straightened, wiping sweat from his brow, Eli was already gone. The rest of the afternoon unraveled slowly, like a thread pulled from a seam. The dogs lost cohesion. One refused to go forward at all, another paced in tight circles, whining. The master's commands grew shorter, then longer, then laced with curses as his control slipped further. Every so often, a sound would come from the trees. A footstep, a breath, the rustle of leaves, and the master would spin, rifle raised, heart pounding. Nothing ever stood where he aimed. Eli let the fear build. He understood fear's value. It made men careless. It made them loud. As dusk approached, the forest grew thicker, shadows stretching and blending. The master hesitated at the edge of a clearing. His confidence finally eroded enough to slow him. That was when Eli let himself be seen just for a moment. A shape between trees, a suggestion of movement, enough to ignite the hunter's instinct. The master shouted and surged forward, dogs barking weakly as they followed. Eli led them deeper, farther from any path that might lead back to safety. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, the forest belonged entirely to him, and the blood in the undergrowth was no longer a warning. It was a promise. Night did not fall all at once. It seeped into the forest the way ink spreads through cloth. Slow, deliberate, impossible to stop once it began. The last light thinned between the branches, turning trunks into black pillars and leaves into layered shadows that shifted even when nothing moved. Sound changed first. Distance collapsed. A footstep 10 yards away sounded like it was right behind you. A breath carried farther than it should have. Ely felt the change immediately. Night was not an enemy to him. It was a teacher. He stood motionless on a low ridge and listened as the master and the remaining dogs entered the dark below. Their shapes broke apart in the gloom, becoming fragments. An arm here, a pale face there, the glint of an eye, the dull shine of a rifle barrel. The dogs' breathing came fast and uneven now. They no longer barked with purpose. They spoke in short, nervous sounds, uncertain of what they were chasing or why. The forest accepted the night like a familiar cloak. Ely moved when the last bird fell silent. He went downhill first, placing his feet where roots broke the surface, where the earth rose to meet him instead of giving way. He avoided leaves when he could, slid between brush instead of through it, letting branches brush his shoulders, lightly rather than snap. His body remembered this kind of movement. It had learned it long before fear became his constant companion. When he had hunted deer for scraps of meat. When he had been forced to trail men who did not want to be found. He stopped near a cluster of trees where the ground flattened briefly before dropping again into another ravine. This place held sound strangely. A whisper here could be mistaken for a voice behind you. A footstep echoed where none existed. Ely pressed his hand to the trunk of an oak and closed his eyes. The forest answered. The master was tired. Ely could hear it in the way his steps dragged, in the way his breathing rasped when he thought no one was near. Fear had begun to compete with pride inside him, and fear was winning. He stopped often now, scanning the darkness, his rifle no longer resting casually, but held tight, knuckles pale. The dogs sensed it too. Animals understood fear without needing names for it. One stayed close to the master's leg, brushing against him for reassurance. The other lagged behind, nose low, tail stiff, unsure which instinct to trust. Ely waited until they passed beneath him. Then he moved. He did not follow directly. He paralleled them, matching their pace, but keeping distance, letting the master believe the forest around him was empty. He snapped no branches. He made no sound that could be traced to a single place. Instead, he made many small ones. A stone rolled down the slope to the left. A branch creaked somewhere ahead. Leaves rustled behind them, then fell silent. The master spun, heart leaping, rifle swinging wildly. He aimed at shadows and found only more shadows. The dogs barked once, then stopped, confused by too many signals arriving at once. "Show yourself," the master called out, forcing strength into his voice. "You can't hide forever." Ely smiled, though the expression held no joy. He knew that voice. He had heard it shouted across fields, barked in anger, softened only when speaking to men who looked like him. Hearing it now stripped of certainty, frayed at the edges, felt like watching a statue crack. Ely circled wider, climbing again until he was above them. From here he could see the faint outline of the master's hat, the way his shoulders hunched slightly as he moved. The dog's ears flicked constantly, tracking sounds that no longer lined up with scent. Ely took a breath and pressed his lips close to the bark of a tree. He let out a low sound. Not a word, not a cry, just a breath shaped enough to feel intentional. The effect was immediate. One dog whined and backed away. The other growled, teeth bared at nothing. The master froze, eyes wide, straining to place the sound. It had not come from ahead or behind. It had come from everywhere. The forest leaned in. Ely moved again, this time deliberately brushing past a stand of saplings, letting their leaves shake. He ran for several steps, then stopped abruptly, vanishing into stillness. The master ran too, boots pounding, panic lending speed. He crashed through brush, swore when thorns tore his sleeves, nearly tripped over roots hidden by shadow. When he stopped gasping, Ely was already gone. The dogs were no longer helping. One refused to move forward at all. The other pulled in frantic, uncertain circles, overwhelmed by scent and sound layered too thick to unravel. The master struck the ground with the butt of his rifle, a sharp crack that echoed too loudly. "Damn it!" he shouted, his voice breaking. Ely watched from behind a fallen log, his chest rising and falling steadily. He felt no rush now. The hunt had entered a different phase. This was no longer about speed or distance. It was about pressure. Night deepened. The master made a choice then, an understandable one. He decided to camp, to wait for morning to regain control. Ely let him. He followed at a distance as the master found a small clearing and built a fire. The flames flickered weakly at first, then steadied, pushing back the dark in a tight, unreliable circle. The dogs lay close, pressed against the master's legs, their bodies tense even as exhaustion dragged at them. Ely stayed just beyond the firelight. He studied the scene carefully. Fire changed the rules. It gave light, but it also created blindness beyond its reach. Everything outside that circle became unknowable. Ely moved within that blindness, testing it, feeling how far he could come before he touched its skin. The master ate quickly, eyes darting between bites. He did not relax. He did not sing or hum or settle into routine the way men who believe themselves safe often did. He sat rigid, rifle across his knees, listening too hard. Ely took advantage of that. He moved around the clearing in a wide arc, stepping on dry twigs just far enough away that the sound reached the edge of the firelight. He let the dogs hear him, but not see him clearly. He circled again. Closer this time, letting his silhouette briefly interrupt the fire's glow before slipping away. The dogs reacted instantly, barking, lunging, straining at their leashes. The master jumped to his feet, heart hammering, rifle raised. "Get back!" he shouted, though he did not know who he was shouting at. He fired once, the shot exploding into the night, deafening in the close space. Birds burst from trees in a frenzy of wings. Ely dropped flat, the bullet tearing through leaves above him. He waited. The echo faded. Silence rushed back in thicker than before. The dogs whimpered. One tucked its tail. The other stared into the dark, eyes reflecting firelight, seeing nothing and everything. The master stood trembling, sweat slick on his face despite the cooling air. He had broken the night's quiet, and it had answered by pressing closer, more alive than ever. Ely did not press the advantage yet. He let the fear settle, let it soak in. He wanted the master to understand something fundamental, that the forest no longer responded to him. Hours passed like this. The master dozed in fits, waking at every sound. The fire burned low. The dogs slept poorly, twitching, whining softly. Ely never slept. Near dawn, when exhaustion finally dulled the master's senses, Ely made his closest pass yet. He moved to the edge of the firelight and stood there fully upright, letting his shadow stretch long across the ground. The dogs woke first. They did not bark. They froze. The master stirred, confused, and followed their gaze. For a heartbeat, their eyes met. The master's mouth opened, but no sound came out. He truly saw for the first time not a runaway, not property, but a man standing calm and unafraid in the dark. Then Ely stepped back. The fire sputtered. The shadow vanished, and the forest closed in again, holding its secret tight. By morning, the master would understand. The forest had learned Ellie's name, and it was not letting him go. By the time the master realized he was no longer being chased, it was already too late. He ran until his lungs burned and his legs shook, until the forest ceased to be a maze and became a wall pressing in from all sides. Branches tore at his sleeves and face. Roots reached up to snag his boots. He stumbled more than once, catching himself only by luck. each near fall sending a spike of panic through his chest. He did not slow until his body forced him to, until he bent forward with his hands braced on his knees, gasping, vision swimming. Silence rushed in around him. Not the uneasy silence of night, but something sharper. Daylight silence. The kind that made every breath sound too loud, every heartbeat feel exposed. He straightened slowly, wiping sweat from his eyes with a shaking hand. His rifle was still with him, though he could not remember when he had last checked its weight. He gripped it now as if it were an anchor, proof that something in his world still obeyed him. He listened. No pursuit, no snapping branches, no footfalls behind him. For the first time since the hunt had turned, he felt a flicker of something dangerously close to relief. "He's gone," he muttered, trying the words out loud. He ran off. That's all. The forest did not answer. He turned in a slow circle, scanning the trees. They stood close together here, trunks packed tight, their bark rough and dark. Sunlight filtered down in broken shards, never quite reaching the ground in full. It was difficult to tell direction. Everything looked the same. He picked a path at random and started walking. At first, the act of movement steadied him. Each step forward felt like reclaiming ground, like reasserting a sense of order. He told himself he had simply pushed too far, let exhaustion and imagination get the better of him. He was still armed, still alive, still capable of ending this. He did not notice the way his steps grew hesitant again, or how often he stopped to look over his shoulder. Eli watched him from above. He had climbed into the branches of a broad oak, whose limbs stretched wide and low, offering cover and vantage in equal measure. From here he could see the master's path clearly, could measure the distance between each uncertain step. He did not move. He did not need to. The master's fear was doing the work for him now. Eli studied him with a calm that surprised even himself. There was no rush in his blood, no hunger for confrontation, only a quiet awareness sharpened by days of listening, of waiting, of choosing when to act and when to let the forest speak. The master stopped again. This time he did not pretend it was for rest. He turned abruptly, raising the rifle, aiming into the trees behind him. His breathing was ragged, his eyes darting. "I know you're there," he called out, voice hoarse. "I know you didn't go far." Eli remained still. A bird flitted from one branch to another. Leaves rustled in a breeze that touched only the upper canopy. The forest continued as it always had, indifferent to declarations of control. The master lowered the rifle slowly. He laughed then, a short, brittle sound that cut off too quickly. "Fool," he muttered. "You're chasing shadows." He moved on again, but his pace was slower now, his steps uneven. He no longer trusted the ground beneath him. Every dip felt like a trap. Every narrow passage between trees felt like a closing door. Eli shifted in the branches, moving soundlessly to the next limb. He followed without following, always positioned where he could see but not be seen. He let the master believe the space behind him was empty. That belief was the cruelest one. As the sun climbed higher, the heat settled in. Sweat soaked through the master's clothes, darkening the fabric. His mouth felt dry, his tongue thick. He fumbled for his water, took a long drink, then another, draining it faster than he should have. Eli noticed. He always noticed. The master slowed again near a small clearing where the trees thinned, just enough to let sunlight pool on the ground. He stepped into it hesitantly, glancing around as if expecting the light itself to betray him. For a moment he stood there, exposed, the rifle hanging loosely in his hands. Eli stepped down from the tree. He did not announce himself. He did not rush. He simply walked into the clearing from the opposite side, letting the master see him fully, clearly, without obstruction. The master froze. Time seemed to stretch thin between them. The forest held its breath. Eli stopped several paces away. He did not raise his hands, but neither did he reach for anything that could be mistaken as a weapon. He stood upright, shoulders relaxed, his expression unreadable. The master's face twisted with shock, then fury, then something raw that he did not have a name for. "You," he whispered, as if saying the word too loudly might make Eli vanish. Eli said nothing. The master lifted the rifle, hands shaking. The barrel wavered, never quite settling. He swallowed hard. "I should have killed you when I had the chance," he said, voice breaking with the effort of sounding cruel. Eli took one step forward. The master flinched and jerked the rifle higher. "Don't," he snapped. "Don't you come any closer." Eli stopped. He tilted his head slightly, studying the man the way one might study an animal cornered by its own instincts. He saw the exhaustion, the fear, the confusion that had eaten away at authority until nothing solid remained. "You lost your dogs," Eli said quietly. The sound of his voice seemed to strike the master harder than any blow. His eyes widened, his grip tightening convulsively. "You don't get to talk," the master hissed. "You don't get. You lost your dogs," Eli repeated evenly. "You lost the forest. You lost the hunt." The master laughed again, louder this time, almost hysterical. "I've still got this," he said, shaking the rifle for emphasis. "You see, that's all that matters." Eli nodded slowly. "It's heavy," he said. "Hard to aim when you're tired." The master's jaw clenched. He tried to steady the rifle, to line up the shot. His arms trembled. Eli took another step. The rifle discharged. The shot cracked through the clearing, deafening and wild. The bullet tore through bark somewhere behind Eli, showering splinters into the air. Eli did not run. He did not even flinch. The master stared at the rifle in disbelief, horror creeping into his expression as he realized how badly he had missed. He worked the mechanism frantically, hands slick with sweat. Eli closed the distance. He moved quickly now, not in a rush, but with purpose. He knocked the rifle aside with one sharp motion and stepped inside the master's reach before the man could react. Their bodies collided, momentum carrying them both to the ground. They struggled briefly, clumsily. The master was strong, but strength meant little when fear stole coordination. Eli twisted free, using leverage rather than force, pinning the master's arm and pressing him face first into the dirt. The master gasped, choking on soil. He thrashed weakly, curses spilling from his mouth in broken fragments. "Get off me," he snarled. "Get off!" Eli leaned close, his voice low and steady. "You don't own this anymore." The words landed heavier than any blow. The master went still, not because he was defeated physically, but because something inside him finally understood the truth he had been running from. The world he knew, the one where his voice commanded and the forest obeyed, had ended. Eli released him and stood. The master rolled onto his side, coughing, eyes wide with something like disbelief. He scrambled backward until his shoulders hit a tree, then looked up at Eli, searching for something. Mercy, rage, meaning Eli gave him none of it. He turned away. The master shouted after him, a desperate, cracked sound. "You can't just leave me." Eli paused, not turning back. "You're already alone," he said. Then he walked away, his steps unhurried, his path clear. Behind him, the master remained seated at the base of the tree, shaking, the rifle lying useless in the dirt beside him. The forest closed ranks once more, shadows shifting, sounds returning, life resuming without regard for the man who had thought himself its master. Eli did not look back. He had nothing left to prove. The hunt was over. Night came without ceremony. It slid down through the trees like a held breath, finally released, dimming the forest until shapes softened and edges dissolved. The air cooled, heavy with the scent of damp earth and crushed leaves. Somewhere far off, an owl called once, then again, its voice echoing through the dark like a question that had no answer. Eli moved steadily, guided by memory more than sight. He knew this forest now in a way he never had before. Not as a place to pass through, but as a living map written into his muscles and bones. Each step fell where it needed to. Each pause had a purpose. Behind him, the world he had escaped did not follow. He walked until the tension he had carried for days began to loosen, until his shoulders dropped and his breathing evened out. Only then did he allow himself to stop. He crouched near a shallow ravine, where water trickled faintly over stone, so quiet it could be mistaken for imagination. He knelt, cupped his hands, and drank slowly. The water was cold. It tasted of iron and leaves. It grounded him. For the first time since the hunt had begun, Eli allowed himself to feel something other than vigilance. Not relief, not yet. Something closer to clarity. He sat back on his heels and listened to the forest settle. Insects began their chorus, a layered rhythm that filled the spaces between heartbeats. Small animals rustled cautiously in the underbrush, emerging again now that the chaos of shouting men and baying dogs had faded. The forest was reclaiming itself. Eli leaned against a tree, the rough bark pressing into his spine. He closed his eyes just for a moment, and memories pressed in where silence made room for them. Faces surfaced unbidden. His mother's hands always busy, always gentle, even when tired. His sister's laugh quick and bright, stolen in moments when no one was watching. The older man who had taught him how to read the woods as a boy, pointing out tracks in the dirt, explaining which sounds meant danger and which meant nothing at all. He thought of the plantation not as a place of work, but as a place of watching, of waiting, of learning when to disappear into yourself, because being seen too clearly was its own kind of danger. Those years had shaped him, even as he had sworn they would not define him. A sound snapped his eyes open. It was distant, but wrong, not the careless movement of an animal, not the whisper of wind. Footsteps, careful, measured. Eli rose silently, every sense sharpening again. He had not expected pursuit to resume so soon. After what had happened, after the master's collapse, he had assumed the others would hesitate, would argue, would decide the forest was not worth the cost. But fear did not always lead to reason. Sometimes it led to cruelty. Eli moved upslope, angling away from the sound, careful to leave no clear trail. He stepped on stone where he could, on exposed roots where leaves would not betray him. He did not hurry. Panic left traces. The footsteps grew louder, more than one person. Eli climbed higher until the ground leveled out near a stand of tall pines. The needles beneath his feet softened his movement. Muffling sound. He crouched behind a fallen trunk and watched the path below. 3 men emerged from the darkness, lantern light bobbing as they advanced. Their voices were low, tense. "He can't be far," one said. "He's got to be tired. He's been tired for days," another replied. "Didn't stop him before." They moved like men who no longer believed their own words. Their eyes darted constantly, their grip on their weapons too tight. Eli observed them with the same detached focus he had given the master earlier. He noted their spacing, the way the man in front favored his left leg, the nervous glances the one in back kept casting into the trees. They were not hunters anymore. They were afraid. Eli did not intend to kill them. He had crossed that threshold already in a way that could not be undone. But killing for its own sake held no power for him now. Fear, properly shaped, could do more work than blood. He picked up a small stone and tossed it gently to his left. It landed farther downslope, striking bark with a dull knock. The men froze instantly. Lantern light swung wildly as they spun toward the sound. "There," one whispered. They moved toward it, weapons raised, formation breaking as urgency overrode caution. Eli slipped out from behind the log and circled to the right, keeping low. He moved past them easily, the darkness swallowing him as they advanced in the wrong direction. When he was well behind them, he stopped and pressed his back to a tree. He waited until their voices faded, until their light disappeared entirely. Then he turned and headed deeper into the forest. Hours passed like this, movement. Stillness, listening, adjusting. The forest unfolded around him in layers, familiar now in a way that felt almost intimate. He could tell time by the way the insects shifted their song, by the angle of moonlight filtering through branches. Near dawn, he reached a high ridge overlooking a wide stretch of land. From here he could see the faint glow of fires in the distance, small and scattered camps, search parties, men who still believed they could bring order back to what had unraveled. Eli watched them without emotion. He thought of what would happen next. He could keep running, drawing them farther and farther into terrain they did not understand, until exhaustion and fear did the rest. Or he could vanish entirely, slip into spaces where their reach ended and rumors began. He knew which choice the forest favored. As the sky lightened, he moved along the ridge, careful to stay silhouetted against the trees rather than the open sky. He descended into a narrow valley where fog pooled thick and white, clinging to the ground like spilled milk. Its swallowed sound blurred distance. Eli walked through it like a ghost. He emerged on the other side near an abandoned trail, barely more than a suggestion in the dirt. Wagon ruts half filled with leaves, grass reclaiming the center. It led away from the plantations, away from roads that were watched and measured. He followed it for a while, then left it abruptly, doubling back through water and stone, breaking his own path into fragments that could not be followed. By mid-morning, the forest had gone quiet again. Eli found a sheltered hollow beneath an outcrop of rock and settled there to rest. He did not sleep deeply, but he allowed his body to ease to recover. Hunger gnawed at him, but it was familiar now, manageable. While he waited, he thought about what he had become in the stories that would be told. They would say he was a monster, a demon in the woods, a thing that could not be caught because it was not human anymore. They would exaggerate his size, his strength, his cruelty, because fear always needed something larger than life to blame. He understood that stories were tools. He had learned that early. Let them believe what they needed to believe. It would keep them cautious. It would keep them distant. By afternoon, he moved again, circling wide around the camps he had seen from the ridge. He left signs deliberately now, broken branches, placed just so, footprints that appeared and vanished, marks that suggested direction without committing to it. He was shaping the hunt into something else. As evening approached, he heard shouting again, closer this time. A group had stumbled into one of his false trails and panicked when it ended abruptly at a sheer drop. Their confusion echoed through the trees. Eli watched from above as they argued, their cohesion unraveling in real time. He went this way. One insisted. No, he doubled back. Another snapped. We're wasting time. A third man sank onto a fallen log, burying his face in his hands. This ain't right, he muttered. This ain't how it's supposed to go. Eli felt no satisfaction, only confirmation. He waited until they dispersed, then moved on. Always ahead, always just out of reach. That night, rain came hard and sudden, drenching the forest, washing away tracks, blurring scent. Eli welcomed it. He let the water soak him, cool him, erase the last clean lines of pursuit. By dawn, the forest had reset itself. Eli stood at the edge of a clearing where the trees thinned, and the land opened into something new, rockier, steeper, less forgiving to those who did not belong. Mountains rose ahead, their slopes wrapped in mist. He paused there, taking it in. Behind him lay the world that had tried to own him. Ahead lay uncertainty, danger, freedom shaped like a question rather than an answer. He stepped forward. The forest closed behind him, sealing his passage as if he had never been there at all. The forest held its breath. Eli stood at the edge of the clearing. The last shards of sunlight filtering through the dense canopy, scattering in golden spears across the forest floor. Behind him, the memory of the master's panic, the shattering of the dog's obedience, and the collapse of the hunt seemed to hang like a tangible weight in the air, settling into every branch, every leaf, every whisper of wind. It was over. At least the hunt itself was over, but the forest remembered, and in remembering it spoke in ways few could hear. He took a slow breath, tasting the damp earth and the sharp tang of pine resin. The smell carried echoes of struggle and fear, mingled with the faint sweetness of fallen fruit and moss. Ely knew that the stories would spread, of a man who had vanished into the wilderness, leaving a master humiliated and dogs lost to their instincts. They would call him monster, devil, ghost. Some would whisper that the forest itself had chosen him, but Eli knew better. He was neither monster nor myth. He was the consequence of a world built on cruelty, a response long delayed but unavoidable. He moved carefully, not because he feared pursuit. There was none, but because the forest demanded respect. Every step was deliberate, a rhythm he had learned over months of survival. Broken branches, fresh tracks, displaced stones. He read them all, noting where the earth had been unsettled, where water had pooled, where the wind had carried scent. These details were not trivial. They were the difference between being a hunter and being hunted, between life and disappearance. Ahead the mountains rose in jagged silhouettes, mist curling around their peaks like smoke. Eli had learned that the higher ground offered both clarity and concealment. From the slopes, one could see for miles, anticipate movement, and find paths invisible from below. Yet the mountains were also unforgiving. Loose rocks, hidden crevices, sudden drops. They demanded focus and precision. A single misstep could undo all he had survived. He began the ascent, muscles coiled, moving with practiced control. His mind replayed the events of the past nights, the initial chase, the way the master had believed himself supreme, the dog's sudden rebellion, the strategic moves through the undergrowth. Each memory was a lesson. Each fear faced a reminder of how fragile life had been in the hands of those who claimed ownership over others. He did not let anger or revenge drive him. Those emotions were luxuries. Precision and patience were necessities. Hours passed as he climbed, the sun sliding toward evening, casting long shadows that transformed familiar paths into alien terrain. The air grew thinner, cooler, carrying the scent of wet stone and pine sap. He paused occasionally, crouching behind outcroppings of rock, listening for any sign of movement from the lands below. There was none, not even the echo of men's voices. It was as if the forest had swallowed them whole, leaving only silence in its place. At a narrow ridge, Ely paused to catch his breath. Below him stretched a valley he had never seen before. Wild and untamed, carpeted with thick undergrowth and twisted trees. Streams glittered in the dying sunlight, snaking like silver threads through the green. It was beautiful, terrifying, and utterly untouched by the cruelty of men. Here he felt the first true sense of freedom, not the temporary reprieve of a night without pursuit, but the permanent possibility of life unclaimed. He thought of the master and the dogs, not with hatred but with clarity. The master had underestimated both the forest and him. He had relied on control, on fear, on obedience. The dogs, too, had been instruments, tools meant to enforce his will. And yet in this place neither had any power. The forest itself had reset the balance, and Eli had learned to navigate it, to understand its rhythms. That knowledge had turned the tables entirely. He was no longer the hunted. He was the observer, the navigator, the unseen presence that dictated the terms of the game. Night fell quickly, pulling a heavy curtain over the valley. The mist rolled down the mountains like drifting spirits, muffling sound and softening edges. Ely found a sheltered nook beneath a rock overhang and settled in, wrapping himself in a thin cloak he had carried for warmth. He did not sleep fully. He could not. Sleep made one vulnerable, even in a place where men and beasts were absent. Instead, he rested in that liminal space between consciousness and awareness, alert to every whisper of movement, every shift in the wind, every rustle of leaves. As darkness deepened, Ely thought ahead. He would not return to the plantations. Not now, not ever. There was nothing left for him there. What remained were shadows of the lives he had been forced to live, memories of cruelty, and the faint hope that others like him might find a way to survive. He would continue moving deeper into the wild, seeking solitude and sustenance, carving a life from the land itself. The forest had given him that chance. He would not squander it. Hours later, as the stars emerged overhead, Eli stood again and surveyed his surroundings. The valley stretched endlessly, and somewhere beyond its folds lay more mountains, more rivers, more forests untouched by men's dominion. The night was still and silent, except for the occasional hoot of an owl or the rustle of a small animal. Eli felt a strange kinship with the creatures of the forest. He was no longer prey, but not fully human in the way he had been defined before. He was a part of the wilderness now, shaped by it, bound to its rhythms and rules. The forest, patient as always, watched him. It had taken his fear, his patience, his skill, and rewarded him with freedom. It had punished those who had sought to enslave him, and it would remember. It would remember the footsteps that had carved a new path through its depths, the movements of a man who had learned to speak without words, to strike without being seen, to command without force. By dawn, Eli had moved again, climbing higher into the mountains. The air was thinner here, filled with the scent of cold stone and wildflowers. He paused at a ledge and looked back over the valley. It was beautiful in its wildness, untouched and eternal. Somewhere down there, the remnants of the hunt might still linger in rumor, in fear, in the minds of those who had failed to capture him. But those whispers would carry only fragments of truth. They would embellish, exaggerate, turn him into legend. He did not care. Legend could not own him. Only the forest could. He began descending into the next fold of the mountains, following paths known only to those who understood the subtle signs of nature. Fallen leaves shifted rocks, the direction of moss growth, all guided him. He moved deliberately, step by step, leaving no trail that could be traced. Each motion was a claim of autonomy, a declaration that the hunted had become the master of his own fate. Eli walked for hours until the sun rose fully and the first light touched the peaks around him. He found a small spring, drank deeply, and allowed himself a moment of contemplation. There was danger still, always, but there was also possibility. Here he could exist on his terms. He could live without chains, without commands, without fear of being owned. He thought of the stories that would be told of him. The man who vanished into the forest. The one who turned a master's tools against him. The one who made dogs into allies of the wild, rather than instruments of oppression. Let them tell what they would. Eli did not need recognition or approval. The forest had marked him, had acknowledged him, and that was enough. As night fell once more, Eli moved through the shadowed valleys with a calm born of experience and mastery. He was no longer defined by what had been done to him, nor by the fear he had endured. He was a hunter in his own right, not of men to enslave, but of life to survive, of freedom to claim. Each step was deliberate, each breath measured, each movement harmonized with the rhythm of the forest. And so the forest kept its secret. It retained the echoes of fear, the silence of the master's disappearance, and the knowledge that a man had walked through it and emerged transformed. The valley, the mountains, and the woods themselves became a testament to patience, skill, and the unyielding pursuit of autonomy. No one would follow him here. No one could. The forest had chosen him, and in that choice, Eli had become more than a survivor. He had become a part of the untamed, eternal wilderness, a presence no master, no hunter, and no chain could ever undo. The story ended there for the world, but for Eli it had only just begun. Step by step, breath by breath, he vanished deeper into the mountains, leaving behind the echoes of the hunted and the hunter alike, a ghost that would live in memory long after the trails had disappeared. Freedom at last was his, and it was complete.